In my home state of Utah, we have a very strong connection to our pioneer heritage. Many, if not most people in the state come from a rich heritage of immigrants that came to Utah in the mid-1800s, seeking refuge from religious persecution in the United States. And every year on July 24th, we get a huge bonus holiday, Pioneer Days, to celebrate this heritage. The late 1840s to the 1870s were a time full of gritty, hard labor, contrasted by many miracles as these pioneers carved out a little slice of paradise in the desert. So, to honor this wonderful heritage, we have some fantastic pioneer stories, starting with our friend Rachel Macdonald and her story, What a Dinner We Had. Here's Rachel.
My name is Rachel Macdonald, and I'm a recent member of the Utah Storytelling Guild, and this is a true pioneer story. You know that feeling when you're waking up, but your eyes are still closed and you're listening to the world around you? That's how it was that day when I was 8 years old, a long time ago, waking up in the morning. My eyes were closed, and I knew that I was squeezed between my two little sisters in our trundle bed that pulled out from Mama and Papa's big bed. I knew I was in the new one-room cabin Papa had just built a month and a half before. I could hear Mama moving around, getting ready for the morning. And the fire was crackling. Mama was singing her favorite song. 'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free, 'tis a gift to come round where we ought to be. I opened my eyes, and I squiggled out between my sisters. I tiptoed around my brothers, laying on the floor, and I went to the fireplace where I sat down and pulled my nightgown over my toes to get warm. My big sister Edith was tending the fire. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," I said. Mama looked at us and smiled. Then she went to the shelf, and she took down the only sack that was on the shelf, a sack of flour. She dumped what was left in that sack into a bowl. Edith and I looked at each other. We knew that was the last of the flour, the last of any food in the house. Mama clasped her hands for a moment and looked to the ceiling, though I think she was looking at heaven. And she said, "Give us this day our daily bread." Then she took a pitcher of water, poured the water onto the flour, and then a smidge of salt between her fingers, and put that in too. With her hands, she kneaded and kneaded the mixture into a nice big lump of dough. From that, she took 7 smaller lumps, one for each of us. Then she flattened them with her hands, put them in a pan, and brought them over to the fire and handed them to Edith. Flatbread. For a month now, Papa had been gone on a fishing trip, and for the last 2 weeks, all we'd had to eat was flatbread, morning and night. I didn't think I could eat another bite of flatbread. I sighed. Mama looked at me and said, "Rebecca, how about you come to town with me today? It's time we asked after Papa and the other men on the fishing trip." Town. Town was Salt Lake City. I'd only been there once when we'd come into our new settlement just a month and a half before. Town had buildings that were more than 1 story high and houses with picket fences and gardens. And the road was as wide enough to turn around an entire horse and wagon. I got dressed and my hair was braided and I was at the table just as everyone else came to eat. I ate 2 bites of flatbread and I gave the rest to my little sister. Then we were off, out the door and down the long dusty road, everyone waving goodbye to us. Mama was wearing her boots. I had bare feet. I'd outgrown my boots long ago, but I didn't mind. The September sun was warm and the air was cool, and I played a game as we walked along to see how many things I could jump over. Rocks, 1, 2, 3, little scrubby Russian thistle, 4, 5, 6, and occasionally a little lizard would scurry across the path. 7, 8, 9, 10. 103, 104, 105. I was tired and my stomach grumbled. "Mama, when will we eat next?" And then I bit my tongue. Papa told us not to worry Mama with questions such as those. But Mama looked at me and said, I don't know. I have hope it will be soon. Hope. Mama liked to say she carried a heap of hope in her pockets. I looked at my big apron pockets just then, and they looked awful empty. But Mama held my hand and started to sing her song. 'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free, 'tis a gift to come round where we ought to be. She squeezed my hand, and I thought, maybe I could put as much hope as salt Mama put in the flatbread that morning. A smidge. And so we walked, and I played my game until we reached Salt Lake City. 305, 306, 307, a house. It was the first house on the edge of Salt Lake. It was one of those houses with a picket fence and a garden, and in the garden a woman was bent over. When she stood up, her arms were full, and they had something red and leafy and green. She said, "Hello, please, come in out of the sun, come sit in the porch and rest for a while." Mama looked at me and smiled and said, "This is Mrs. Jackson. She loves to welcome people to Salt Lake City." So we went in through the fence and sat down on the steps. Mrs. Jackson deposited what was in her arms into a basket and went into the house, where she got 2 cups of water for each of us. I sat on the step, Mama sat on the chair, and I looked at that basket. Radishes, beautiful bright red radishes with leafy green stems. My stomach grumbled a little. Mama said, "We came to ask after the fishing trip. Have you heard?" And Mrs. Jackson said, "I haven't, but I'm sure if you go further into town, you'll be able to ask someone who will know." Mama nodded, and then she looked at Mrs. Jackson's garden and she said, "Your garden is just beautiful." Mrs. Jackson said, "It's been more than good to me this year. In fact, today I have more radishes than I know what to do with." "We'll take them," I said. And then I bit my tongue again. Mama looked at me sternly, but Mrs. Jackson laughed and she said, "Of course you will. We just need to find something for you to carry them in." She looked around for a moment, and I did too. And then I looked down, my apron pockets. "We can use these." So me and Mama and Mrs. Jackson pulled all the stems off of the radishes, and we washed them real clean, and we filled my pockets with them. Mama said, thank you, Mrs. Jackson." And then she looked at me. "Yes, thank you, Mrs. Jackson," I said. And then we were off down the road, the wide road of Salt Lake City, the radishes bumping against my legs as we walked. Oh, they smelled so good, and I wanted to pop one into my mouth. But then I thought how much more fun it would be if I waited until I got home and shared them with my brothers and sisters. As we walked, Mama hummed her song. Until we came to another house. This was Mrs. Gray's house, and she was a friend from back home. When she opened the door, she wrapped her arms around Mama in a hug and said, Oh, Hannah, it's so good to see you. You've probably come to ask about the fishing trip, haven't you?" And Mama said, Yes, have you heard?" And Mrs. Gray said, "All I know is that a messenger came into town late last night. It may be a message from the fishing group." Mama said, "Oh, thank you." Then Mrs. Gray said, "If you go further in, Mrs. Baker, her husband, is on the fishing trip, and she may be able to give you more news." So we sat down for a moment, and then Mrs. Gray saw my pockets, and she said, "Rebecca, what do you have in your pockets?" And I said, "Radishes. We got them from Mrs. Jackson." And then Mama surprised me and said, "We don't need so many, though. Would you like some?" And Mrs. Gray said, "I would, thank you, but not without a fair trade." She disappeared into her pantry, and when she came out, she was holding a pan brimming with lettuce and watercress, crispy and leafy and fresh. She set it on the table, and I quickly emptied one of my pockets of radishes and then stuffed the watercress into one pocket and held out my apron to hold the rest of the lettuce. And this time I remembered. "Thank you, Mrs. Gray," I said. "Yes, thank you," Mama said. And then we were on our way down the wide roads of Salt Lake City. The greens filled my nose, and then a little thought shot through my head like a tiny arrow. And I thought, wouldn't these be delicious with bread? Mama, wouldn't these taste so delicious with bread? And Mama said, yes, they would. Already we have more than we started out with. Yes, I said, and I felt my heart brimming with hope, almost as full as my pockets. Soon we came to Mrs. Baker's house. When she opened the door, she said, oh, Hannah, how perfect that you should come on this morning. Just last night, a messenger came into town, and good news. The men have caught more fish than they know what to do with, and they'll be coming home any day now. Mama closed her eyes, and her shoulders relaxed, and Mrs. Baker wrapped her arms around Mama and held her for a long moment. Then she opened her eyes, and she saw me. And she said, my goodness, what do you have in your apron? And I said, radishes and lettuce and cress. And this time I beat Mama to it. And I said, we don't need so much, though. Would you like some? And she said, yes, I would, but not without a fair trade. So she disappeared into her pantry. And when she came out, she was holding a slab of butter, creamy butter, wrapped in paper. And as a special surprise, a wheel of cheese. Thank you, Mama and I said at the same time. She handed the butter and the cheese to Mama. And Mama said, well, we best be going. I need to get back to my children and tell them the good news. As we turned to go, Mama paused for just a moment, and I saw her eyes glancing at something on the table. I looked, and it was a bowl full of broken bread. Mom and I looked at each other, and Mrs. Baker saw and said, oh, it's a shame, really. That bread was in a bag on a wagon when it fell off this morning, and the wheel rolled over the bag and broke the bread. I would offer it to you, but I fear you would be offended. And Mama said, not at all. We'll take it gratefully. So Mrs. Baker found a clean sack, and she filled it with the bread and handed that to Mama, too. Now the two of us said goodbye, and we walked down the wide roads of Salt Lake City and the long, dusty road home. And on the way, we sang our song. Mama began, "'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free, 'tis a gift to come round where we ought to be." And I finished, "And when we find ourselves in the place just right, it will be in the valley of love and delight." When we walked in the door, everyone exclaimed at the food filling our arms. We put it on the table and marveled at the color and the smell it put in the air. And we quickly gathered around after washing our hands, and Mama clasped her hands and looked up at heaven again and said, "We thank thee this day for what we are about to receive. May we be truly grateful." And I was. I had put a smidge of hope in that big empty pocket of mine, and kind Providence had filled it with food. Spicy, crunchy radishes, crispy lettuce and watercress, creamy butter, crumbly cheese, and crusty bread. What a dinner we had that day.
Word had spread all over England that there were many new and exciting opportunities for anyone who wanted to go to Africa and help establish the empire's colonies. Excitement spread throughout the country, and soon Robert Bodily felt that excitement himself. It would be a big move for him and his young family, but he felt called to go and venture to establish himself in Africa. Before long, he and his family were headed for Cape Town, South Africa, leaving friends and family behind in England in hopes of a brighter future. It didn't take long after arriving in Africa for Robert to establish himself and his family in the colony of Port Elizabeth. They built a nice home for themselves with a splendid view of a great mountain which frequently had clouds over the top of it, making it look a bit like it had a tablecloth over it. He and his wife strove diligently to teach their children from the Bible, teaching them the stories of ancient Israel, especially of Joseph of Egypt. They had belonged to the Church of England and tried their best to follow its teachings out in the wilds of Africa. By 1857, Robert and his family found themselves living a comfortable life in Port Elizabeth. The Bodilys had established themselves as one of the most well-off families in the colony, and things showed no signs of changing. That is until a family friend, John Stoggs, introduced them to two young men from America. These young men claimed to be missionaries for the true Church of Jesus Christ, which had been restored by a prophet in America. Upon first meeting these missionaries, Jane, Robert's wife, eagerly used a variety of Bible verses to try and disprove the church. Much to their surprise, however, these missionaries aptly used the same exact verses to prove their church to be true. In the morning, as the young missionaries were preparing to leave, Robert presented them with a purse and a small amount of money before sending them on their way. It was nearly a month later when the missionaries returned and shared more about the restored gospel with Robert's family as well as some of his hired farmhands. Following this visit, Robert and his family studied and pondered what had been shared with them. Before long, Robert wrote to his friend John asking him to come and baptize him and his family, as well as some of their hired hands. Soon the Bodily home was made a gathering place where members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and missionaries could find shelter. But not everything could last forever. In 1860, heeding the call of church leaders to gather to Utah, the so-called Zion, Robert and his family sold everything they had and set sail on the old ship Alacrity. They paid for several other families to make the trip with them and eagerly looked toward America and Zion. The trip would by no means be easy, but it was worth it to be able to gather with the saints. Their journey was at many times a wonder-filled experience, full of new and exciting sights. James Bodily, one of Robert's sons, decided one day to go fishing off the back of the boat for a shark that had been following the Alacrity for a few days. The captain of the ship eventually took notice and came out bellowing, "What you doing here, you little brat?" James explained, and the captain called the crew over. They took a big fat piece of pork and stuck it on the end of a big hook, throwing it into the water. Immediately, the shark took the hook in its mouth, and the sailors worked all together to bring it aboard, singing a sea shanty the whole time. By the time the shark came up, they found that it was 12 feet long, which was why they had needed the entire crew. Along the way, the Bodilys frequently came in contact with nature in all of its beauty and frightening power. One morning, they came on deck to find whales bouncing and playing in the water. While the passengers were entertained, the captain was less so, since he knew that if just one of the whales hit their ship, they would sink. At another point, there were flying fish all around the ship, a few of which Robert dried and preserved to show off when they arrived in Utah. Nature, however, wasn't always kind to the passengers of their ship. There were storms that at times threatened their very lives. During one of these storms, James was dashed violently against the cabin and feared he would drown. Another storm was so threatening that the captain begged the elders and other men to pray for the storm to cease. These men went onto the deck, holding fast to rods in other parts of the ship, and all knelt together humbly in prayer in the midst of the storm. Upon arising from their fervent prayer, they found that the storm had begun to cease, and soon it passed completely over them. After their long and tedious journey, they arrived in the port of Boston to a rather amusing surprise. Word had spread that there was a ship full of Africans arriving in the port, and everyone wanted to see the ship full of colored people. Much to their surprise and disappointment, the ship was full of white African sailors, although they were all of different nationalities. From Boston, the Bodilys took a train to the town of St. Joseph. It was the children's first time on a train, and shortly after they boarded, 2 stalwart Indians also boarded it. The kids were all very excited to see their first Indians. On one occasion, as the family was waiting to board a boat to take them up the Mississippi River, there was a man nearby cleaning the paddles of a steamboat. He knew that the company consisted of so-called Mormons, and was muttering and cussing at them under his breath, when suddenly he slipped into the river and wasn't seen again. The Bodily family eventually made their way to Florence, Nebraska, where they outfitted a wagon for the remainder of their trek, as well as 5 others for their fellow pioneers heading to Utah. Robert was appointed captain of the African group under the leadership of Nephi Johnson. While at Florence, Robert generously donated $2,000 to the church's immigration fund to help others come across the plains. To entertain themselves along the trail, Robert would put a stick in the ground anywhere from 50 to 100 paces from the group. On the top of it, he would place a dime, and the game was that whoever managed to shoot the dime could keep it. Finally, the Bodilys arrived at the Salt Lake Valley after nearly a year of travel on October 5th, 1860. The children experienced their very first ever snow as they camped out at Little Mountain. Robert and his family had sacrificed nearly everything they had, generously giving along their travels. After their long and arduous journey, the Bodilys were finally in Zion. Their first winter was somewhat difficult, as there was neither flour nor money at the tithing office to pay Robert back for his donation in Florence, Nebraska. He somehow found a supply of flour to get his family through the winter, and in the spring he sought out President Brigham Young to make a present of the money. Upon hearing this, President Young asked him if he was giving it with good feeling. Robert's humble reply was, "I dare not give it any other way." President Young then smiled and placed a hand on Robert's shoulder and said, "God bless you, Brother Bodily. You will go down to the bedrocks, but you'll never see the day when you shall have no bread, or your children after you shall have no bread." A few days after, Robert met with George Buchanan, who he had given the money to while in Nebraska. He inquired if he had received his money, and Robert told him how he had made a gift of it. Brother Cannon then placed his hand on the same spot as President Young and said the exact same words. Robert marveled that they both said the exact same thing. Their blessing was fulfilled, and Robert never did see the day when any member of his family went without food. Stick around after this short break for one more story of pioneer miracles. When the Latter-day Saint pioneers first arrived in Utah in the summer of 1847, they immediately set about preparing the soil for a spring harvest the next year. The winter was harsh and there was a lot of food shortage. So when the pioneers planted their crops in the spring, they were excited and hopeful as the thick green crops grew. However, just as quickly as their hopes had grown, they were quickly dashed as a large swarm of crickets invaded the Salt Lake Valley in May and began to devour the pioneers' crops. For over a month, the pioneers fought a losing battle against the invading insects as they devoured everything in sight. The battle was so fierce that many called it the Cricket War of 1848. They used everything they could to get rid of the invaders, including battering them with brooms, brushes, sticks, and ropes. But nothing deterred the army of famine and despair. Soon many people were considering leaving Salt Lake for the greener pastures of Oregon or California. Others prayed fervently for relief from the infestation. Soon the Latter-day Saint pioneers' prayers were answered, as in early June, large flocks of California gulls swept into the valley, feasting on the crickets. At first, the farmers thought this was yet another calamity, before witnessing the seagulls feasting on the crickets, lowering their numbers to safer levels and saving their crops. A similar series of disasters and miracles would happen for many of those early years in the Salt Lake Valley, causing the Latter-day Saint pioneers to venerate the California seagull. And once Utah was established as a state, it was even chosen to be the state bird in memory of the miracle of the crickets and the seagulls. I hope you have enjoyed today's journey through some stories of the Latter-day Saint pioneers. These stories certainly have a lot of significance for me as a descendant of the pioneers, and in fact the Bodily family we learned about are among my own ancestors. To me, it is so important that we remember the stories of our ancestors, because not only can they be incredibly entertaining as we've seen today, but they can help us to see those same attributes passed on within our own families. Take Robert Bodily's generosity, for example. I've seen a similar serving attitude from my own parents and grandparents. And because of this, I want to be a better, more generous person. Because, after all, my descendants might just hear about my story, too. The Story Ark is a production of Food for Thought Audio. This episode was written, edited, and researched by me, Kenny Mears. A huge thanks to Rachel Macdonald for sharing her story, What a Dinner We Had. You can find more about Rachel on her profile with the Utah Storytelling Guild, link in the description. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to share it with your friends and family. And if you want to stay up to date with our latest news and bonus content, you can do so by following us on social media on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. As always, thanks for listening, and keep on telling stories.